Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I'm here sharing two different Hanukkah cards featuring a scrapbook.com digital cut file as well as a Lawn Fawn stamp set. So I cut this card front design that has the series of candles as a reference to the menorah at the bottom, and it cuts as a whole card front. However, I did decide I wanted it a little bit smaller than I cut it, so I just trimmed off the edges a bit. If you do not know how to cut digital files with your scan and cut, in the video description I'm going to link to a separate video tutorial that I did and a blog post tutorial that I shared, because I knew that some people would know how to do it, and so taking up that 4 or so minutes it takes to explain in this video might be kind of distracting or frustrating for them. However, if you need that information, check down the video description. I wanted to glue this onto some glitter paper so that the candles looked glittery, but also that there was a glitter border. So that's why I had to trim it down a little bit. I'm going to be combining the digital cut files with this Hanukkah stamp from Lawn Fawn. This is an older stamp, and I've shared a card with it in the past, and I will link that video in the video description. I will also link to some other Hanukkah stamps, because in the past when I have shared Hanukkah cards, people ask if I know of any other sets. And I think it's just because there's not a lot of them out there, and they can be a little bit trickier to find compared to, Christmas sets or maybe more general winter sets. So I'm going to link extra stamp sets, and I'm going to link some dies. I really like the digital cut file, but I know it's not for everyone. Not everyone has a machine already. So I wanted to provide that alternative just in case you're curious. And that's also why I wanted to share two inspirations. I know there's not a lot of time left until Hanukkah at this point, but I just know that we could always use more inspiration for this holiday, as there's just not as many videos. So I took a cat scrappiness die and cut the banner. Then I heat embossed with silver embossing powder the Happy Hanukkah message from the Lawn Fawn stamp set. To glue this onto glitter paper, you really need a good liquid glue. I have tried my ATG and other dry adhesive tapes. None of them have ever done the job on glitter paper. However, my most favorite liquid glue that you all have heard me say a million times, Barely Arts glue, is really good for many, many things, but particularly I've never had trouble with it sticking to glitter paper. So I was very happy to find that as a go-to solution. I use that to glue down my sentiment as well, because the sentiment will be overlaying the candles and therefore will need to stick to the glitter. I did want to pop up my sentiment, so I just took 2 strips of scrap cardstock and glued them together to kind of create my own foam tape, because actual foam tape wouldn't stick anyway. It would basically just be like any other dry tape adhesive, and it would fall right off the glitter. The Barely Arts glue has a fine tip, which also makes it great for gluing thin embellishments like the Star of David's. I'm going for my next card to use some blender brushes. This is my Make It by Marco brush holder, and there's little brush buddies on them. With my blue brush, I know it's blue because the actual brush is blue, but some of mine are black, and so having the little brush buddy, that's that little plastic blue thing on this one, it tells you the color. So sometimes you can't see with the bristles if you have the brown bristles that are on some of the brushes, and so the brush buddies can be pretty helpful. I'm going to link that. It's a small, one-woman show or one family show, so it's a great place to support if you think those solutions would help you. I am very, very happy that I picked up the brush holder, because I find that I use my brushes more and I blend ink more. When I was using the traditional Tim Holtz round blender tool, I was finding that it was the Velcro was coming off the tool, or the individual pads were falling apart over time. And that was kind of frustrating to me, because I want to be able to just, go for it when I'm ready. And I don't want to have to be fussing with figuring out how to fix a broken tool, even if it is relatively inexpensive to replace them. And so, yeah, I've been happy with my brushes. I have been happy with my brush holder because it puts them right on my desk and I just pluck it out and get going. And I use the same brush for all my blues, the same brush for all my greens, etc. So, and so I'll link each of the brushes as well that I use. I am using Distress Oxide inks. I used Blueprint Sketch and Stormy Sky. I wanted a little bit more depth, but I didn't want to add the Blueprint Sketch to the edges because it was a little too bright. So I came in with Faded Jeans. I really think any blue combination you want would be perfect because I'm going to do some layering of other shiny stuff on top of this as well. I'm taking an Imagine Crafts glitter spray, and if you shake the bottles, the tips tend to get clogged. But if you instead take your bottle of glimmer spray or whatever kind of spray and you roll it back and forth between your hands, that tends to mix up the glitter pigment, particularly this one, without clogging the tip. I found that unfortunately with my Dilutions white spray, I tried the rubbing it between my hands, but it just didn't mix it enough. All of the pigment was still at the bottom. So then I did the traditional shake, but it kind of causes the tip to clog, as I mentioned. So when I first did get it to finally spritz after a few pumps, it really let out like a lot in a kind of a blob. So if you find that happens to you, I suggest putting a scrap piece of paper down, or I have a box that I spritz in so that I don't get spray all over my table. Just let a spritz go into the box. Make sure it's spraying the way you like before you bring in your paper. Once I have my background all dry and the way I like it, I am ready to add in my sentiment. My sentiment is also cut with the digital cut files, and it's a little bit trickier to work with than a die in some cases because all the letters are individual. A lot of dies, the letters are kind of attached. And there is a scripty version in the digital cut files where more of the letters are attached, but it's very fine and delicate to work with, which is not as much my personal style. So I decided to go with this. I think the digital cut file is a good alternative to purchasing dies for a couple of reasons. If it's a die that you don't need to use a lot, maybe you're only making a few cards a year, that's great because it's much cheaper and you don't have to store it. So it doesn't take up physical room in your craft area, but you have access to those sentiments. Now, you could, of course, also just take your alphabet dies and cut out whatever sentiment you like. Your scan and cut machine comes preloaded with some alphabets, so you could spell out the word there. However, when you purchase this digital cut file set, you're not just getting the word die. I kind of think of the words or the word cutout. I think of those as kind of like a bonus. What I'm looking for more is the images, particularly the card fronts, because a card front, like a digital cut file that cuts a card front, is a lot like a cover plate die. Those are like $25. They're crazy expensive. And the whole digital cut file right now, as of recording, is only $2.99 on scrapbook.com. So much better deal if you know how to cut digital files or if that's something you're willing to learn. It's actually something I didn't know before this. It's something I just learned how to do, and I wanted to share with all of you because I was like, yay, new uses for my machine. I mean, I was so excited. I was like, how have I owned the machine this long and not used things like this? Because it adds so much value to my machine and saves me so much storage space. Anyway, back to the card design. I cut out a bunch of the Star of Davids out of glitter paper. I'm going to brag on digital cut files again. I could cut 9 at one time because I could cut as many as I wanted. I cut 9 specifically, but you could cut as many as you want, as many fit on the piece of paper, and then you could cut them again and it all cuts at one time. You don't have to keep cranking them through your machine, or even if you have a digital machine, you don't have to actually crank them anymore. It still takes a lot of time if you're only going to be able to cut one thing at a time. And so I was quite happy. I'm going to use my Bearly Arts glue again to glue these down because there's really fine lines. You could add adhesive to the back of your paper before you cut it, but I find that to be really frustrating and difficult. It's not my thing at all. I would much rather use liquid glue. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm just going to try to fill the top left corner of my card here as much as possible. I'm going to trim off anything that's overhanging. So you see several of the stars are hanging over the edge there. That's okay. I'll just turn it over and trim them off. And in fact, after I trim them off, I always tend to consider whether I want to take that piece that was trimmed off, that it was overhanging, and lay it somewhere else to fill up my design more. In this case, I don't know that I found anywhere that I really felt like it could use a bit more. But I also try to pay attention to where it's overhanging so that it's in a, like, when I cut it off, it's still going to have a desirable look. Once I finished off that, I felt like, unfortunately, there was a really large gap over on the right-hand side of the card. And so it needed a little something extra. Plus, I wanted to show you card ideas with the stamp set and the digital cut file, and I wanted to use both on each card so that you kind of saw like they worked well together, and that I think you should certainly create a card with just the digital cut files. But if I was going to take out a stamp set just for the sentiment, I thought it'd be nice to show you another idea, like what else you could do with it. So I'm going to take Deep Sea ink from Fawn, and I'm going to stamp a menorah over here to fill this additional space. I liked that this card, I liked the sort of monochromatic look. I could have tried to silver heat emboss this, but I felt like that would, the heat embossing powder would catch underneath all the die cut pieces. So I thought stamping would be better. And because I wanted to keep the color palette simple, I didn't want to add anything else. I just went with a darker blue there. I'll trim that down and add it to a card base. So that's my first card there off to the left. I added it to a card base. I'll do the same with this one. It's still a little wet. Be careful about that. You definitely want to let everything dry in between when you are creating these more artsy cards. And then I will also add that to an A2 size card base, and that will be it for both of my cards today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more craft tutorials, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I will leave you links in the video description below to all of the products that I mentioned. And there will also be links down there to how to use your scan and cut, and some social media links if you want to follow me on Instagram or something like that as well. Thank you so much for taking this time. I hope you found some value in this video and that you have an awesome day. Also, please leave me a comment. I love talking to you guys. Bye.